Hello, Austin and beyond. Welcome to this third installment of the Austin Ableton 8-week workshop series presented by the Austin Ableton User Group. I'm your host for this evening, Alberto Chapa, Austin Ableton Certified Trainer. Um, we have a great lineup for you today. I just want to let you know not to forget that these workshops are for you, our community of Ableton users here in Austin, but also beyond. We've had people connecting with us from Louisiana and from the UK last week, and that was very exciting. So use the comment section under this stream to get to know each other, to share your ats, and tell us where you're from. We've got a great lineup today, and we're going to have a performance and presentation on Ableton techniques for drummers by Mason Self. And we're going to have Ricky Graham show us some techniques for creative expiration using Max for Live. It's going to be awesome. But before we start, I want to remind you all that Tom Carlisle is a fellow CT here in Austin, and he's the admin of the Austin Ableton user group, along with a few other of us, and for on Facebook. And he's worked really hard over the years to create a space for Ableton users in Austin to get together and create a shared community. So to keep this going virtually, Tom has created a website and a Discord server so that we can all stay engaged and virtually connected during quarantine. So you can join us. We're on meetup.com. You can search for Austin Ableton user group there. We're also on facebook.com/groups/Ableton ATX. And you can find us at www.abletonears.com, a great resource for Austin Ableton users that Tom set up. And then also on the Ableton Discord server. And Tom's going to be posting that link for us down in the comment section a little bit later. So yeah, keep an eye out for replays that we're going to be posting for this later. And do share if you know any Ableton users that would benefit from this awesome knowledge that we're sharing. Again, don't forget to comment on YouTube and Facebook if you have any questions for tonight's guests and if you want to be part of the conversation. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Mason Self. He is joining us from Florida, and he's here to talk about using sensory percussion for melodic expressivity, which is a very exciting topic. I'm very excited to hear what he's going to share. Please welcome Mason Self. Hey,
Thanks.
Mason.
How's it going, Alberto? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. I know you've got a really, really cool setup that you're going to share with us and a lot of really cool knowledge. So I'm excited that you've taken the time to be here with us, connecting all the way from Florida, putting up with the heat.
Yeah, our my AC went out over the weekend, so it's 90 degrees in here, but it's okay. I got ice packs on all the computers, so it's just two. I mean, it's not.
Well,
It'll be all right.
if it helps, we can get our community of users to comment with ice cube emojis down
Oh
below.
yeah, that'd be good. I mean, at least in my mind, it'll feel a little cooler, but it's all right. I apologize for being slightly unpresentable, just dripping in sweat. But
Not at all, man, at all. Yeah, I know you've got a lot to share with us, and you're also going to you're going to perform for us.
yep.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time. The stream is yours. I want to hand it off to you. And I want to remind everybody, like, if you have any questions about Mason's setup or what he's doing, please write them below in the comments section, and I'll share them with him later on.
All right. Sweet. So I'm just going to pull this down on my drums and play a song and then share my screen and kind of explain what's going on and then answer any questions and stuff and we'll go from there. All right.
Hey,
That was a song called "Pause" from an EP I just put out earlier this year called "Glacial."
that was
And
awesome, man. Thanks for that performance. Just a
thanks.
heads up, we were still getting a little bit of like a noise reduction kind of thing going on with your drums and
Okay,
your music at first. Just
gotcha.
at the top of the song.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Um, that might have had to do. Was it when everything got loud?
Yeah, when everything got loud, it just kind of like accepted that music was being played. So I think
Yeah.
maybe like getting it used to the drums at first might take it
Okay.
like from human voice mode to music mode when this was
Gotcha. Okay,
happening.
cool. So maybe I'll just tap around for a second before hopping in this time. Um, okay. Well, let's share my screen and I can give you a little quick run through of what's going on with that. Um, so, if you're not familiar with sensory percussion, it is a machine learning software that allows you to get 10 different zones out of one drum. And that's what this visualizer, I can never say that word, visualization area is in the center. And if you play drums, you know that's a lot of different sounds you could get out of one drum. And that's great. I mean, utilizing these zones is awesome, but what is really, really cool about sensory percussion to me is that you can extract controllers out of it. There's several kinds. The main ones are timbre, velocity, and speed. So what's so cool about timbre is that, like, you can get a controller from between the center of the drum and the edge of the drum as like a modulation source, and then you can use that modulation to control anything about the sound. So um, you can you can assign these to built-in samplers within sensory percussion, or you can pipe them out as CCs. Where do I have my CCs on this one? I don't know. I guess it's just this. Maybe I'm not using. Oh, I guess I'm not. Oh, it's this kit. Anyway, uh, more on that later. But you can send MIDI out of sensory percussion into Ableton, and that's what I'm doing um, here. So I have some in sensory percussion. I have just some drum samples, which you can mostly hear like on the rim of the snare. I had some like ratcheting hi hats, and then let's see if I can pull this up. On the rim, I have, is it that one? Is it that one? No, it's this one. Okay, so this is just a hi hat sample, and I have it looping 10 times, but I'm using a controller on the length of the sample, and that would be this one. So depending on how hard I hit the rim tip with velocity, that determines how long the sample is, which translates to, uh, like the rate of the repeat. And this is just a super specific example of using the technology, and I'll get into how I use it compositionally in a second. But so if I play really softly, you could see that the repeat time is pretty quick. And if I play harder, I'll just change the range to be dramatic. Interesting. I'm not sure why that's not working. Oh, there we go. So if I play softer, it will be longer repeats. So anyway, that's one specific example of using the controllers to get something more expressive out of samples. If you're a drummer and you've used traditional triggers or like a SPD or something, obviously you could play samples with velocity, and that's fine and great. But this allows you to go much further, and it's extremely open-ended what you can do with it. So what I love doing with sensory percussion is piping all that MIDI into Ableton and playing different instruments. For instance, like the top of the song, I'm playing this xylophone. I forget, what is this instrument even called? It's an Ableton instrument that's great. It's a physical modeling synth, I believe. But that's how I started the top of the song, just playing that. And I'm using the Bink Beats looper, to capture a loop that just happened right there, and I stopped it before the action actually happened. Um, but that is over here. And I have this dummy clip that just records, tells it what scene to place it in, and then that's playing on. And I got rid of the launch buttons or the stop buttons so that that plays throughout most of the song. And I'm using a Max for Live device that I made. There's this technique called sample and hold. I learned it in the modular world, but it is basically if you have a you usually it's used for generating random stepped voltages, um, or you could think of it as just like randomness on eighth notes that applied to the filter or something like that. But I fell in love with using it for melodic information, uh, getting into using sensory percussion to compose and like perform melodic music from the drums. It became really appealing to me to be able to just write out a melody, um, and just a normal clip. And these aren't going to be particularly exciting because it's just that repeating da 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 da. So I just put in these two MIDI notes right here, and I created this Max for Live device that just sends it into um, Max World, and then receives it somewhere else on the same channel. And I have a couple different devices that handle it differently. In this case, it's just going to cycle between those two notes. And what I like about that is that I don't have to, if we go back to sensory percussion, you can create a ton of MIDI information out of one drum. If you get specific with all of the zones, you can assign a MIDI note to each one. But I find that's kind of limiting and really hard to play a specific melody repeatedly. Like for instance, if your air conditioning went out and you're sweating so much you can't see out of your glasses, you might not get it quite right. Um, so I find this is really freeing to just write out the melody in sort of a dummy clip, and then uh, use all of those controllers and all that wonderful sensory percussion expressivity for something else. Um, so that's what's happening there. Another thing that I really like about um, the Bink looper, just to brag on that for a second, is that I can loop MIDI from the drums and then alter it later on, because this loop, here, let me just do that really quick. Let me capture this loop again. So there's my loop. And if we look at that, it's just this one note coming from me. Uh, the same pitch because I was just playing the one drum. But because it's going through the MIDI sample and hold devices, it's being processed by this melody. And then what's powerful about that to me is later on in the song, I have a different melody, and that didn't look like all that different because it's it's just the two notes. But we got F2 and G2 here, and I believe this is C and D up here. So I'm able to capture something that I did at the top of the song and change it later. So anyway, I'm kind of stuck on that, but I really like that technique. Um, I'm using that same sample and hold idea for the bass line as well. Let's that would be over here. I have a big chain that's receiving the pitch information. I have this big chain of different effects. I guess this would be the bass. um, yeah, so I'm using Wavetable, incredible instrument. I particularly like Wavetable because it has so much MIDI input built in. And that's just, I find that's really powerful for using kind of an alternative MIDI controller like sensory percussion, to be able to just go here and be like, oh, let's add some like keyboard tracking, or use the velocity right here to do something, even like invert the range and that kind of thing. Um, but I'm using that same sample and hold idea back over here, and I have a separate sequence here that is this is the bass line plonked out over a weird amount of measures because this is a weird song. um, So that's how I use sample and hold. I am going to let Ricky dive deeper into the Max for Live stuff. I'm going to learn a lot from him later. Um, but I really like that Max for Live is built into Ableton Live Suite because I can come up with an idea like, oh, I want to use sample and hold for kind of throttling melodic information. Oh, I guess I could just make that. And I'm not a Max for Live expert, but I was able to figure it out. It's an incredible tool. Um, cool. So that is the real quick dive into this, and I'm going to keep moving just to play some more songs. And all these songs have a pretty different approach. But so before I move on, does anyone have any questions about what I just played and what I just talked about?
Yeah, also, aside from questions, we're getting some great, nice, awesomes, and cool emojis, so I just
Oh,
wanted to give you
good.
some feedback. People are really digging what you're playing, man.
Thanks. That's good.
So, the first question is actually, if you have issues with latency and what kind of things happen in this world that we might not be used to in, like, typical audio workflow and MIDI workflows?
Totally. Yeah, so latency is real, uh, first of all. But the second thing, and this is just my opinion, is that latency is not bad. And I know that's kind of counter a lot of companies' marketing and stuff. And even for users, they're like, wait a second, I want to be able to play this complicated thing through my computer and feel like it's an acoustic instrument. That's a great, theoretical idea. And I mean, I would like that too, but I know enough about digital audio to realize that that's hard. That's so I take a pretty open-handed approach with it and actually embrace the latency. Okay, let's just real talk. Full disclosure, there is some latency, but it's really not that bad. I think you could hear it on this song with because I have an acoustic snare drum down here and I'm triggering some sounds. Let's just pull this up. Uh, so this is the plugin again. And on the, I don't think I actually did it when I played this song, ironically, but I think it's here or or maybe it was where is it? I guess it's just the center. Um, so I'm playing the drum, but also triggering like all of these samples over here on the right. And if I was to print this, of course those samples are going to be later than the acoustic drum, but I think that's fine because in production, if you're layering a clap over a snare drum, do you want those transients to line up? No. I mean, maybe in some contexts, but for me, I like to have that flam or like that. It gives it groove for there to be discrepancy in timing. I mean, that's what makes a groove in a band anyway is discrepancy in timing. Uh, so that's my little rant on latency. I think it's a wonderful quirk and idiosyncrasy of making electronic music in this way. And in MIDI world specifically, MIDI is very squirrely with latency, and I find that again, I choose to embrace that as like a bit of a exciting wild card of like, oh, how many drinks does the bass player have tonight? Like, what's this going to sound like? And that, but that makes it fun to play in a band to have for it to not be the same every time. With the sample and hold devices, specifically, let's see if I did it, if I was a good programmer on these sequences. Um, but I do actually tend to, it looks like I was a bad programmer. It's all right. But I often will actually put this note just slightly ahead. And it's not a big deal. It's pretty easy to do that. Or you could even just push this first one a little bit and then like change the start time just a tiny bit like that. So that way that new pitch information gets in right before the downbeat. So anyway, but okay. So aside from all of that, the latency with sensory percussion is ridiculous. Like I mean, ridiculously good. It's very it's way faster than any other trigger that I've used. And I mean, this is a pretty involved Ableton session I have going on here. So there's a lot of stuff happening in sensory. And I mean, I pulled up some of these chains. They're really quite big. And my computer can handle it as long as I'm smart about it. So it's totally doable. But yeah, it is a little bit different than just like uh, recording a drum set with 10 mics or something.
I love that answer. I love that point of view. And earlier today, I was streaming Laura Escudet's workshop. She's another Ableton certified trainer. Shout out to Laura. And she had Randy George on, and they were talking about how they were into controllerism and setting up stuff like back in the, I guess, 2008, 2006 and stuff, and how latency was just part of it. You didn't really think about it or complain about it. And
Yeah,
uh, I like this from a percussionist approach because you're totally right. It can create this different pocket. It's just another part of the instrument.
yeah,
And speaking of, so people are asking if you can show us a little bit of a close up of your sensory percussion setup in your drum kit, if that's possible. If not, we can digitally do that later in the recap.
yeah. Let's see what I can do. I am tethered, and I got ice packs that are making this possible with my AC situation. So, um, cool. So this is. I think I stopped sharing my screen, so it
You
should
did.
just be good. um, all right, let's see what I can do here. Real pro right here. Pro move. Okay, so um, this is as good as it's gonna get. Acoustic snare drum. There is a mic in there, and the sensory percussion sensor is right there, um, right there. And I'm using a drum tortilla to kind of muffle that area. And I find that that makes it really easy to train the drum because sensory percussion uses machine learning, so you have to teach it what all the sounds of the drum sound like. And I'm using a calfskin head, which is probably a horrible idea considering the weather inside right now. But uh, it's working fine overall. So acoustic snare with a sensor on it. Far side back there, this is a mesh head with a sensor on it. Sensory percussion takes on a whole new life to me when you use mesh heads because then you can get really far. You can really stray from drum sounds and play things that are not drums that would, that sounds good being performed in a percussive way. Whereas if I was trying to plonk that out on a rack tom, it would sound really bad. um, so I really like using mesh heads. I actually usually use all mesh heads in my setup, but I felt like pushing the envelope a bit and trying something different. So I'm using a hybrid setup today. Over here, oh, can't turn it. That's a rack tom tuned super high. And I just have a ride and an overhead. So the mic situation is just a snare and an overhead. And then I'm using a KD7 on the kick, which I'm piping through sensory percussion uh, as like a fake sensor input, which works fine. So that's a setup, and then I process all that through sensory percussion to get, uh, all the controllers and MIDI notes out of it. And then I'm on the drum side. I was pretty limited in how I could process the drums. That's all a pretty fresh experiment still, um, just with CPU stuff because I wrote the song and decided where to spend CPU and stuff according to the mesh head setup. But now, like with a live stream setup, I have to present the drum audio as well. So I just leaned really hard on the drum bus, a drum bus with two S's. Um, this thing sounds incredible just to warm things up and cut things out. Um, but yeah, it's pretty minimal processing. That's the kick trigger, which is a sample coming from sensory, and this is my snare mic and overhead. So yep, that's the setup.
That's a great tour. And then one last question before you switch over, and I'll let you perform the next song. Is
Sure.
if you're performing it, just to clarify, in session view, or if it was a prearranged arrangement that you were playing to earlier.
Yes. So this is it. This is the whole song right here. Um, I am using, I have a, I'm so I didn't. I kind of glossed over this and just hopped into the deep end. But I my thinking behind structuring a composition is let's lean really hard on automation to create changes that aren't very musical to do from the drums, like changing what samples are available or the transposition of MIDI notes and stuff. um, so I have all of that happening and these dummy clips here. So this is the whole song. uh, and I have each song in a different scene, or sorry, each section of the song in a different scene. And then with each of those scenes, I could select a different kit in sensory percussion, which pulls up new samples and new controllers. And I just use these dummy clips to advance scenes automatically, and I can just change the length of the clip. And then all of these dummy clips over here have either the sequence, like the sequence of the MIDI notes that I'm going to sample and hold via the drums, uh, or the instruments that I'm going to play. Um, I am a big fan of the chain selector and automating that to pull up different instruments for per section. Because if I had a different track per instrument, this would be way bigger than it already is, and that's a lot of tracks for one song, in my opinion, at least. So yeah, it all happens here. Um, and then if I like when I record it, I would record this whole thing and then hop over and like do normal mixing workflow over there.
Great. Yeah, people are saying sick camera work too, by the way.
Sick camera. It's camera. Thank you. I appreciate that.
um, but yeah, I don't want to take up too many questions on this one sec because I know you're gonna pull up another example of how you're using this.
Yeah, totally. Cool. For the sake of time, I may skip a song and play a new song that I wrote fairly recently. And if we don't get to the others, it's okay. I'm not going to be upset. Uh, this is so. Before I hop into it, this is the workflow where I have each song in a group, and then the song sections and their scenes are kind of cascaded. You can kind of roughly see this song happens here, this song happens here, uh, and that way I could each song is kind of self-contained, and then I could open up. I mean, I don't even have to open it up, but I could play this. I want to play this song. Cool. Next. Cool. Here's everything I need for that song. So cool. I'm gonna hop over and play another song.
That was awesome. That was a great track to share. That was really cool.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, maybe you can share a little bit about your workflow when you're composing a new track, because my main question is, do you does it affect the way you play the drums as an instrument, right? Because now it's like a layer on top of the same drums you've been playing probably all your life. And does that impact the way you write something? Do you write it based on, it would be cool if my drums did this, or does it start with a melody? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, it never starts with a melody. I wish I was that kind of composer that just like had an epiphany. The muse fell on my shoulder, and then I just like threw it down. Um, that does happen sometimes, but it's extremely rare. So this song came about just because I found a sample that I really liked. Where did I keep that? It would be uh, sorry. My landlord just called me. I'm that kind of threw me off for a second. So this okay, sorry. Um, this sample, I found this, and it's the sound of a acoustic guitar being played through a Leslie, and just like kind of playing around with it. I um, let's see if I can pull this up really quick. This I there's a I don't know if I could easily like override the automation, but there's basically two chords in this sample. Um, and I automated it such that it would play this. Let's see, let me skip ahead. So we're hanging out on this chord for a little bit, different vibes throughout the thing, and then we're going to the other chord over here, and that's the chord progression for this song. And I just kind of just tinkering around with it. I'm like, oh, cool, that's a nice little melody of like where, and with, like a chord progression came out of that, and there's all of this interesting timbral change as I move that start time over. Um, and from there, I was like, oh, cool, maybe I should add this, like, this feels like a kind of minimalist dubby, especially with the echo um, composition. Maybe I should add some arpeggios because that's what you do when you're writing minimalist music. So uh, that is what's uh, going on over here in the this part of the chain. Um, I'm using this Max for Live device, the mono sequencer. It's been on my bucket list to check this out, um, but I never got I just haven't had the time to until uh, writing this song. But it was the perfect way to incorporate that. So what I did here is um, I used automation to open up. I like figured out this little sequence that sounded nice with the chord progression. And then I automated the, oh, by the way, with the mode I have here, I forget, what am I triggering this from? That's funny. I don't even remember what I'm triggering it from. Oh, the track has to be running. Um, classic. Uh, so let's turn this off. The way I have this set up is when I play the drum, it'll play, it'll go through the sequence as long as the MIDI note is active. So what I did is I used, in my dummy clip automation over here, I automated the note length so that it starts out as just one note and then two notes and then it unfolds into five. Um, so we could watch that happen over here. And if I play somewhat near the downbeat, which I can't hear the click right now, but yeah, we're getting one note. Now we're getting two notes. Maybe I could even solo or get rid of that. Oh, that's the wrong chain. Um, and then now we're starting to get the full sequence just by me playing periodically like that. Um, and so that, that's like that's a whole vibe right there. And that's like 1 minute into the composition, just using that one sample with the two chords and going back and forth between them, and then adding the sequence unfolding right here. Um, and then I found like a super dirty sample to just like uh, juxtapose that niceness, and then that's like basically a song. So uh, it's just a lot of exploration, a lot of tinkering, and then seeing what sticks. I record things a lot. I have a lot of ideas that don't sound any good, so that happens all the time. Uh, but it's okay. I mean, it can feel cool to play it, but that's why I record it so I can go back and listen to it. I'm like, would I want to listen to this if I wasn't playing it? And if I say yes, then I keep digging. So that's kind of a, I don't know, that's a kind of a squirrely answer, but that's just how I work. I just tinker a lot.
That's a great approach, and I think that's a very inspirational approach to a lot of people that are waiting for that muse to tap them on the shoulder and say, "Here's your song ready to go," right?
Yeah, I think that definitely happens, and you should definitely learn to recognize when that comes, because you got to pay attention to that. But if you want to work on your craft, you can't wait for that to happen. Um, you just got to keep. I mean, sometimes I'll have a session like just figuring out how to make the sequencer do that in a way that felt cool. Like, for instance, one thing I ran up against when I figured out how to sort of make it unfold like that, changing the note length, and then recorded it and listened back to it the next day. I'm like, wow, it sounds like I'm just jamming to a sequence. Like it doesn't translate at all. And that's fine, but it just felt like it was very stark to me. So one thing I figured out that I could do is it has a swing parameter. That's not it. Where is it? Where's the swing? Here it is. The swing parameter here. And I realized that I could modulate that, like the swing amount. Let's see if I was a good programmer and labeled that. Oh no. Oh yeah, I did. Velocity to swing. Great. So I believe I'm using the whole like velocity from the entire kit to determine the amount of swing. And it's just a tiny bit, like 11%, which gives it a little bit of a feeling that interacts with my drumming. And to me, that made the difference. I'm like, cool, I feel really good about this. It feels compelling to me now. So, uh, yeah, I guess just if you want to compose music in whatever way that you want to do it, you just have to keep trucking. And
Have
then
you ever come across a limitation that you haven't been able to find a workaround for, or is like there a thing on your wish list that you really want somebody out there to develop for you?
uh not I honestly, most of the things that I've wanted to do and I felt like I couldn't do is just because I didn't know enough about using my computer. um, or like for instance, when I first got into this, I actually went very deep into the modular world because I um, thought that, like, cool, if I want to be able to interact with all of this stuff using all the sweet controllers from sensory percussion, I got to get that as a voltage on a cable so I can just patch it into whatever I want to do. And that was really fun, and I'm still planning on exploring that world. But I felt like I realized, well, for one, that's very cumbersome, and very hard to repeat. And that's okay. I mean, that can be a good thing. But in this case, kind of what I've gravitated towards is pretty specific ideas. Um, I mean, even though it feels vague at first, I kind of hone in on something that I like, and I want to be able to present that later. So doing it in modular meant either I'm never going to use my modular for fun because I got to leave this thing patched up, or I just have to really, really document how I did my patch and spend a lot of time recreating it. And I just don't have time for that. So I realized, like, using, for one thing, this Max for Live device has a really unmemorable name. It's like API MIDI CC, something like that. But it's incredible because it makes it really, really easy to just grab a CC, which is like one of those continuous modulation signals, in my case from sensory percussion. And then you can just click here to map and then click the parameter, much like mapping macros. if you just like go into this map mode, it's the same. And once I found that, it just sped up the whole process. Um, anyway, I kind of rambled there, but uh, the other things that I couldn't, like a limitation that I couldn't do, I was able to pull it off in Max pretty easily, relatively easily, like with uh, the sample and hold devices. And then in that song, I was using another device, Legato Gelato, which is sort of like a cousin of sample and hold, except instead of sampling, I think it's more of a, is I think track and hold is the right word, where for a duration it will let MIDI like pitch information through, and then it'll clamp it down. So in this case, I'm just triggering this from the drums, but the sequence that is controlling Legato Gelato is, I think this, and this is just, if I run this is just craziness of, using some chords and arpeggiator, and then this arpeggiate, which for a long time I actually thought was aggregate. I don't know why. I guess I just can't read. But that's just like a chaotic progression. And then when I play the kick, it lets those notes through. And it was really important for me for the beginning of it to trigger a new note and not just be like riding the volume on something. But anyway, so just learning how to use the Ableton instruments better, and then learning some Macs so I can make some super specific things for myself.
That's awesome. I love the colors on, was it Legato Gelato or
Leg-
Gelato Legato?
Legato Gelato.
Such a great name.
Thank you.
Uh,
I'm a gooey master over here. Just kidding. Uh,
like a Neapolitan ice cream with some
exactly. Yeah.
pistachio on the side. So
Yeah.
we have time for one more song, if you don't
Okay.
mind doing one more. But as we're switching over, we've got a really important question, and that is, where can people buy your record?
Yes. Bandcamp is the best place, for me at least. I have a lot of music on Bandcamp, but I have several EPs on like all streaming platforms as well.
Awesome.
Um,
That's just
yeah,
under Mason Self, right?
Mason Self. Yep, that's my real name. Um, yep. Okay. So considering that my landlord called me, I might play a song as Just Mesh. um,
Sure.
I haven't seen what he said, but I wouldn't
And
be
you've
surprised if
you've
it
already
was.
been very generous with your time and everything. If you have to call it because of a time issue, we
No,
understand.
I think it'd be. I think it'd be okay. I actually have one that would work pretty well.
And you can
Just
tell
on
your
Mesh.
landlord to join us too. He can ask questions on the comments section.
Yeah, I should just text him really quick. Hey, tune in, bro. It's fun. It's cool. It's educational too, and not just, it's not sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Uh, uh, anyway, okay, cool. I'm gonna play it. This is a really short song, but I like the minimalism in it. It's called Golden, and I might. Okay, I'll just stop sharing because there's not much to see actually in Ableton for this one. All right, see you later. Okay.
Awesome, Mason. That was excellent.
Thanks.
And landlord friendly too, which is always a plus for people that are getting into drumming.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, the mesh has definitely expanded my drumming time, especially with we have a 2-year-old in the house, so there's that restriction too. Uh,
Definitely good to know during quarantine. I mean, a lot of people are probably itching to play their drums every day.
yeah, yeah, for sure. But this definitely, yeah, the mesh heads work great for that. But
Yeah, well, Mason, you've been very generous. I really appreciate it. Where could
sure
people
thing.
follow your work before I let you go?
Um, I have a website, masonself.com, and it's sort of a hub for a lot of the things that I do. But most active on Instagram and YouTube as well.
And that's
Uh,
at Mason Self or
yep, at Mason Self, and then YouTube is Mason Self as well.
all right. Well, we got your link up there for the folks. And
Cool,
thanks again. Everybody really appreciated you coming over. And we'll have to have you back because there's so many questions yet to be answered.
cool. Yeah, I would love that. That'd be awesome. Thanks
All
for having
right.
me.
Well, everybody, we'll be right back in a few minutes. We're going to set up with Ricky and have some more fun. Three, two, one, and here we go. All right, everybody, we're back. We're back with Ricky Graham. He's a fellow Ableton certified trainer connecting from Cleveland. He's also
Hello.
a musician, educator, and developer. And he's here to share some really cool insight into using Max for Live creatively and technically. So welcome, Ricky Graham. Hey, Ricky.
Hey, Alberto, how are you doing?
Doing well, man. I'm really happy that you're here. I love meeting and getting to know Ableton certified trainers. So
Yeah.
we've met briefly before, just setting this up. So it's cool to have you at a workshop.
No, I'm really glad to be here, and Mason's presentation was really phenomenal. Phenomenal. So I really enjoyed that. So cool. Do you want me to share screen or just
Yeah,
dive right in, or?
yeah. Let's dive right in. I'm sure you got a
Okay.
lot to cover. So the stream is yours.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Have at it.
So I guess when you and Seraphin reached out about this, we wanted to do something on Max for Live, and typically I would build a device, but rather than do that, at least initially, I wanted to show you what you can do with pre-existing devices. And I'm noticing that Alberto is a little frozen here, so I'm hoping that we're still live.
We are.
We are cool. Sorry, your screen is kind of frozen, so I just wanted to make sure that we were still good. So let me share screen, and we can have a chat about Max. So you should see. Do you see my screen all right?
Yes, I do.
But you know what? I didn't do the whole. I did it again. I didn't do the share. Oh no, there you go. Share computer sign. Cool. All right. So yeah, typically like when I introduce Max, Max for Live within Ableton, I would build a device or something to that effect. But there are a ton of really good pre-existing devices, some of which are actually embedded in Ableton already. You know, you have, for example, the convolution reverb, which is what I'd like to look at today. There's a lot of really cool, fun, creative exploits you can go explore with it, and yeah, we'll have a look at that in just a moment. But one thing I wanted to flag is like a good starting point for anybody that's interested in Max for Live. If you're not a programmer, you've no interest in coding, that's totally fine. I mean, the premise is, you know, these devices extend the functionality of the DAW, right? So anything that Ableton doesn't do straight out of the box, you know, you can effectively build it yourself. You saw that in Mason's presentation, which was just super inspiring, you know, to see like somebody be so thoughtful about like MIDI effects in general. I thought it was really kick-ass stuff. The website that I'm talking about is maxforlive.com, and it's just a plethora of existing Max for Live objects, or devices rather, that you can just download for free and drop into your sets. And they do a whole bunch of stuff from like, you know, just audio effects processing through like, you know, feature recognition, two of which I'm going to talk about later in the presentation. There are two here that I kind of uploaded under a little Delta Sound Labs account here. So one's a filter based on the Resay filter, which is kind of an infinitely sweeping set of frequency bands, and a Helmholtz, which is a pitch follower, which is a nice basic monophonic pitch follower for anybody that plays a pitched instrument and wants to do a bit of MIDI tracking and maybe control an oscillator, say, you know, using operator or something to that effect. But I'll get to that later. I have a few web pages and links and things I'll share at the end. I don't want to sit and hope through my browser tab, but let's just dive in with the Ableton set itself. So on this first example in this set, you'll notice I got this group, and so what I have on this track is actually an audio sample of something that I'm working on myself. I'm also a producer. I also like to write a lot of music when I can. I'm just going to start by playing that. Hopefully, Alberta, that level rises. Not too bad.
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. All right, so convolution reverb, generally, the idea of convolution itself is, why it excites me is that you can pretty much take the spectral profile, the timbre or the color of a sound, and map it onto another sound. So it's basically sample by sample, kind of piecing together of the spectra from one sample to another. And as far as convolution reverbs go, you know, there's this really nice convolution reverb within Suite. There are two versions of it. I'm going to discuss maybe some of the differences between the two in just a minute. But the idea here, and I'll provide some resources if you're interested in learning about it, is that you can load in what's called an impulse response to kind of tell the convolver program, what is the response of that space. So like if you imagine walking into like a concert hall or something like that, clapping your hands, and you hear how the room sounds. Like that is you're hearing how the room responds to that impulse. The impulse being like you clapping your hands. The idea there is, and you can see as let me just play a sample, give you a couple of examples. That's a dry. So let's have a look. Play with a nice dry wet here as well. The simple version of this, the more simplified version of it, also has a 3-band EQ, which is really nice too, so kind of boost and attenuate certain frequencies as well. So yeah, it's just a reverb. So why does that matter? Like, why are we excited about it? Well, you can design your own impulse responses. You can go out and record. There's two approaches basically where you can go and feed an impulse response into your room and capture that reflections in the space using a good quality microphone. Or you can also use like a sine sweep to kind of sweep through the whole frequency spectrum to try and get a more accurate response of a space at every given frequency, which is a little bit more complex. The latter approach is more complex because it has a deconvolving process that you need to go through in order to get that sine sweep out of the measurement. But what I've noticed is that there are a lot of producers who are playing around with just synthesizing their own. So what I wanted to do is kind of just show you how you can use Operator to create your own little impulse responses, and how that might affect like audio. And by the way, the reason this relates to Max for Live is that the convolution reverb, just to be clear, was built using Max for Live. So for those of you who haven't seen Max before, it's a graphical programming language. It looks a little bit like this. It's a series of objects that you connect together to create a process. You saw or you heard the result of some of those processes in Mason's presentation as well, which were just super awesome. So taking in MIDI data, manipulating them for his creative purpose and or goal, and it's pretty awesome. It's worth, I think, exploring for sure. So if you are interested, there are a ton of really good resources. Cycling 74 have done a really stellar job of documenting all of the Max in general as a programming language, and you can build it right in your in your DAW in Ableton. So it's pretty cool, pretty powerful tool. So you can see like it has like UI features here, where you can like drop in. This allows us to drag and drop, an audio sample or impulse response in this case on there. It kind of, a lot of it looks like, blocks and cables. So similar to, guitar pedals connected together to create some kind of process, right? So you can get a sense just by reading some of the names here. It's like EQ and stereo running into a pre-delay. This is the convolving process I was talking about. There's some kind of volume adjustment, gain stereo, a panner, and crossfade between the dry and the wet. This tool set, actually, a lot of these really cool devices typically come out of just avid Max users who are also Ableton users. This particular, the HIS tools or HISS tools, came out of University of Huddersfield. They have a really nice research group there and a really nice journal as well. It's just littered with like really, really good software. And if you're interested in things like spatial audio, I know Christopher Willett's on last time, Alberto, and he was talking about the software that he uses. This is like a research group that specializes in spatial audio. So have a look at CERENEM at the University of Huddersfield. But anyway, they're responsible for the convolution reverb inside of Ableton, and it's pretty great. So anyway, let's have a look. Let's try and create some impulse responses then. So what is an impulse response? It's a very short sample. It generally has an attack. We're going to be using the short transient approach. We're going to kind of synthesize, something with a really apparent attack. We're going to, probably disregard that later and just try a few more experimental approaches too. But you can see the underneath here, this one's about almost 3 seconds in length. And basically what we're doing is we're looking at the spectrum of that. So what do I mean when I say spectrum? I mean, if you look at audio effects, we have spectrum in Ableton, right? So this is what I mean by a spectrum. So if I play my sample again, you can see, generally speaking, what the frequency content is in the mix, where lows and highs are. And that's essentially what we're gleaning from the impulse response as well. We're pretty much just trying to, from that little short snippet of audio, we're trying to get a sense of, well, what are the most prominent frequencies, is there a long decay, and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's what we're really concerned with. There are a ton of really good presets, but one thing that is kind of cool is if you take Operator, and I'm assuming that, a lot of folks are familiar with these devices. I know some of you may not be, maybe completely new to Ableton, so I just want to make sure that everyone knows where these things live. Operator is more of a premium high-end device, multi-oscillator instrument inside of Ableton Live Suite. So you may not have access to it if you're using Intro, but it is available in Suite. And what I'm going to do here, basically just use oscillator at bank A. And I'm going to use just a white noise loop. And I'm going to use my ADSR to create that kind of like little transient effect from scratch. So I'm just going to drive it with a very long MIDI note C3. So what does this sound like? Very uninteresting initially. Oh no, it's actually not too bad. It's pretty wild. Right, okay, let's just make it white noise. We'll start from scratch. All right, so that sounds like a little bit of maybe a hi-hat sizzle, the beginnings of it, like if it were being synthesized. Robert Henke has that great video on like designing 808 kits. If you haven't watched it, you should. So yeah, it's just white noise. It's not really that interesting. But what we can do with this is pretty much determine things like how dark our reverb sounds, how abrupt their reflections are. We can also give it like a longer tail. We can give it like a fade in, and all of these have some bearing on the convolution process when we feed it into the convolution reverb. We can also use our filter to create darker sounds and brighter sounds. You got a bunch of different filter types in here, an Operator that you can use to kind of sculpt your impulse response that you then feed into the Max device. So let's play around, see what we can come up with. I'm also going to be using a technique called resampling. I know a lot of you probably are familiar with this already, but one of the reasons I love Ableton is that it allows you to pull audio from the master track back into another audio track, and you can reuse that. So I have it into this homemade IRs track right here. All right, so let's get the filter off initially. All right, so that's what that sounds like. So let's give it a bit of a tail, and we'll record that in. Okay, and then we'll go in and we will just crop that. And again, a nice thing about this is it's going to be a pain to get to, so I'm just going to replace that one. With Max for Live, you can use these drag and drop style UI boxes so that we can just drag it right on like this. Okay, so that's my homemade IRR. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but let's hear what it does to the track that I played before. Oops, that's that. We don't want that. So you can hear it makes it brighter because of the white noise effect, right? And there's a pretty large decay on there too, which of course you can accentuate or attenuate with additional controls too. So let's go back in real quick. What if this tail is super tight? Pulled the wrong one here. So let's turn it off for a minute. So make it really, really abrupt. Okay. So let's try that. So much quieter. Again, I'm using the ADSR built into Operator to do that. There's virtually nothing to play with there. Let's record that in again. Okay, so I'm going to use my warp markers just to make sure that that looks okay. We wanted to get it close to 0, but we also don't want to lose the attack entirely. So there we go. That looks all right. Looks pretty good. And let's cut that, crop it, and we'll drop that in. And here are that size. So a lot more boxy, right? It's there's not much of a decay to it. And so there's virtually no tail to that at all, and that's just through using the envelope built into the operator. Of course, this gets more interesting then when you start to play with a filter. So what we can do is just give us a crazy tail and switch on our filter. We just have the one there, so we don't need to play around with that too much. Let's see. So if we wanted to create an impulse response to give us a very dark sounding room, what we could do is use white noise to do that with a kind of a low corner frequency for a low pass filter. And that's exactly what I'm doing right here. If I wanted there to be a more resonant quality to the convolution reverb as well, then I can use my resonance control to play around with where that corner frequency is kind of being brought up. It's a little. Yeah, there we go. That might be fun. Cool. I think that last one was pretty good. So hopefully at this point you get the idea. You can create these short little impulses and drop them straight into the convolution reverb, and you can essentially roll your own impulse responses for the plugin, make your own reverbs through synthesis, which is pretty powerful. And again, that's something that Max affords. So again, it's definitely worth, I think, exploring Max more. Let me drop that in, see what that sounds like. So you kind of hear the boxiness of the low pass filter, and you can also hear that resonance that was applied to some degree as well, which is kind of neat. Cool. So that's the simple version. This actually gets even more interesting because the underlying convolution object that's used supports multi-channel formats. So what the Pro version of this allows you to do is apply different impulse responses to each channel, which is pretty badass. You can also like reverse them and stuff and play around with position. So it gets very, very cool very quickly. And again, it's using Max under the hood. We have a chat. The reso is sweet. Thank you, Mason. Appreciate that. Very, very cool. All right, so let's we can just drag in a couple of these to kind of get a sense of what it sounds like. So let's see. The single mode basically allows you to apply one IR across both channels, but if you do split, you can apply independent IRs independently to each channel, which I think we should do that. And you can also apply them to early and late. You can affect the early reflections and late decay times too. But let's play around with this a little bit. Why would you want to do that? You would want to do that because it gives you a greater stereo width to your music. It kind of gives you depth that you can, really have control over in your productions. So it's definitely worth exploring. The use of a convolution reverb, particularly the Reverb Pro inside Alive. So let's try the single one. This is, what is this? This looks reversed to me, which I actually don't want. Just gonna cut this back in. Cool. Oh, that's weird. There we go. That's the shape tab that allows you to reverse the IR. Okay, cool. All right, so let's have a listen. I have something that's, pretty echoic. This was one that I actually downloaded. Another thing I wanted to share with you is that even if you don't want to synthesize your own, you can download a lot of impulse responses from a bunch of different websites, some of the links for which I'll share at the end of the presentation. But you can download IRs that people have actually gone in and professionally measured and dropped them into your productions as well. So this was like a Baptist church in Nashville, like from a balcony. And it does a fairly decent job simulating the space. So if we go to split, we can play around with which one is applied to early and which one's applied to late. So you can grab the beginning of this one and the tail of the other. Another thing that this has, which is really cool, again, same kind of 3-band EQ, so you can play around with your lows, mids, and highs. The position feature is pretty cool because then you can place emphasis on one part of the space, right? So if it's right front and center, it's going to sound drier, like it's right up in front of you. I'm not sure if the panning is coming through over Zoom, but again, this probably builds a little bit on Christopher's presentation. The further away we are, you're going to get the later part of the impulse. So there's a lot you can do with that. Modulation section as well. Damping to, again, more filtering. We can also play with the shape. You can create some pretty weird and wonderful effects if you apply the impulses in reverse. Play that one more time. Cool. All right. So what if we just very quickly make some really rad sounding IRs using something a little bit more interesting than just a little white noise pop. So let's use our LFO to control the filter. We'll try and jazz it up a little bit. The more you, I guess, the more musical or the more note-based this thing becomes, the more you're going to hear that in the convolution process. So you may or may not want that, but I mean, for the sake of creativity and just exploring cool stuff, definitely try this out. So what we might do, an operator is, we'll stick with white noise just for the minute, see what we can achieve with that. And we'll bring this back up so we can hear what we're doing. So we're using the LFO here to control the filter. So we can use that to kind of sweep through lows and highs, and that sweep will come through in the IR. So let's record that in real quick. Okay. So again, this is pretty unconventional, but they might produce something interesting, just for a moment in a piece of music. So why not give it a shot and see if it works? Let's drag that right into. I'll just use single for a minute. Yeah. All right. So that looks monstrous, but let's have a listen. So you can hear the profile of the frequency sweep, or the filter sweep in the music, which is kind of neat. I quite like it. What if then we do something where we, we can try split, and rather than use white noise, we could try something. Well, yeah, let's pick a different sound. So let's do a 16. Partial square wave, and we'll try that. So, but we probably want to keep the envelope pretty tight. Maybe give the attack a little bit of time to creep up. So it doesn't sound like much, but let's see what it gives us as an impulse response. All right, just for good measure, we'll crop that. And let's drag it into, throw it in here. See what's up. All right, let's hear it single. We'll A/B test these two just to see what we've got. That's pretty wild. And I think this is an example of like the more tonal it becomes, the more you're going to hear that in the music, which is why you should probably try and limit it to kind of little white noise impulses. But you can do a lot of timbral change through the use of the filter. So that's definitely a strategy that I would encourage. All right, so that's a little bit on pre-existing Max for Live devices that I think are pretty powerful, especially if you're really interested in spatial music and spatial audio in general. Convolution is a really powerful process. There's a lot of researchers out there doing really cool stuff. One way to couch this that I find really interesting is it's more in the pure data world, which is the kind of sister software to Max in some ways. I've heard it couched as timbre stamping, which is kind of cool. So it'd be like, hey, I'm going to take the timbre of a bass guitar and like stamp it onto, I don't know, a flute or something, just to hear what that continuous tone sounds like, you know, with a very different mechanically made instrument. And you can get pretty crazy results out of it. So I would encourage you to play with convolution reverb inside of Ableton. And if you're curious, open it up and have a look and have a dig around, no pressure. You know, it is a bit of a rabbit hole. If you haven't gone down it before, you can kiss goodbye to your social life if you have one. Although I don't think many of us have one right now. So maybe this is the opportune moment to learn Max. Possibly, we'll see. So again, it looks kind of similar to the last one, where it's using a lot of the same kinds of processes under the hood. If you already use Max, which I'm sure a lot of you do, this library, the Hiss externals are available that you can, like, if you wanted to make roll your own flavor of a reverb or some kind of spatial manipulation tool, they're really pretty good. I really like the multi-convolve object. It really seems to do a pretty good job. So the thing that's doing the heavy lifting is in here. So yeah, multi-convolve tilde. So yeah. So that's basically just weighting, you know, your source material against the impulse response, basically. So that's a little bit about convolution reverbs, rolling your own IRs using operator, and you know, it's all built in Max for Live. So if you're interested, definitely explore that. I do have two devices I wanted to share with you, kind of wrap up the session today that we built. We were kind of, so Alberta mentioned I'm a developer, kind of a developer. I don't know. I feel like I'm definitely always learning and never really at that level. Fortunately, I work with people that are much better developers than I am. But I certainly try and contribute what I can. I actually do a lot of the design of plugins using like Max or PD, like a prototype using a graphical programming language. And when I say we, my business partner and I, Edwin Park, run a company called Delta Sound Labs. We just released our first software plugin. We were in the Eurorack space for a little while, but we've since discontinued that, and we're now focused solely on software. So we have this granular synthesizer that we built. It's a VST, VST3, AU, you know, the whole works. We'll run in Ableton. It's pretty fun. Yeah, check it out. You can download it for free and try it out with a limited feature set. So that's kind of what I do. The reason I'm showing this really is just because this plugin started as a Max and a PD patch, like a Max patcher. So like that was kind of my gateway into development, was using a graphical programming language, because I'm a musician first and foremost, although I don't spend as much time making music as I used to. Yeah, to learn to code was not something that really, I was never really that interested for the longest time. But the more time I spent with my craft, kind of what Mason was talking about, you know, I really love that conversation, because it's amazing what kind of paths your craft can lead you down. Especially when you've got a dedicated instrument like a drum kit. In my case, it's guitar. And that's probably a good segue, so we don't have to look at a browser anymore. So I'm gonna shut this up. We'll move over to example 2. And I've got 2 Max devices I want to talk about. So the first one is actually made by one of our original co-founders, John Harding. He was our hardware designer. And he made an earlier version of this. I redid the GUI for it and added in a distortion stage for it. We released this just as a free device, which was a lot of fun. So basically what you're looking at, again, is another device built in Max. And this thing's pretty cool because you can, again, we were just trying to prototype ideas. Like we were just like, what do people like to listen to? Like what do they need? What are the kinds of tools that they need? And Max is a great way to figure that out. So this was a filter that we kind of threw out there. And on this track, I just have a pretty basic, uninteresting groove. I'll switch this one off. We're not getting anything because... Why am I not hearing anything? Because my group is off. Like a legend. Right. Alright, so that's... I also, Mason, love drum bus with 2 S's. It is awesome. That's it without. If you don't haven't used drum bus yet, definitely explore it. It's pretty cool. So this should be like a drum loop that's kind of a little heavy hitting. What this filter does, it makes it sound a little bit psychedelic. It's basically a fixed set of bands that kind of infinitely sweep either up or down through the frequency spectrum, and it creates this kind of weird psychedelic effect. And we have a Q control for the bands. So it's just a bunch of bandpass filters. That's really it. The magic is like having them kind of lockstep, moving through the frequency spectrum. And you can change the direction, you can change the speed. And this device is completely free. You can download it from maxforlife.com if you're interested. You can also sync it to the DAW. So that's me pulling the tempo down. And under the hood, again, it's all using Max, so it's, slow that down. Yeah, so it's basically just a bunch of bandpass filters. Really the hard work is in the GUI stuff, for the most part. I mean, yeah, both took time, but yeah, I mean, to make a device like this, at least to prototype it, you can do it pretty quickly. I think you often hear, and especially in this day and age, you hear people talk about rapid prototyping a lot, particularly in the tech industry. And I think that's where Max is really cool inside of Ableton, because you can be working on a project and be like, I really need this thing, and then just build it if you know how to. And if you don't, there's plenty of people that can help you build it, and there's a ton of resources on how to use the software too. So if you're sitting thinking, like, I'd like to learn Max, but I just can't get over the hump, there's a ton of really good tutorials. You should check out tutorials by my good friend Gregory Taylor at Cycling. He has some really good stuff for beginners, particularly if you're interested in video as well. So yeah, so that's a little filter you can download for free if you like. I'm also a guitar player. This one's the UI is kind of a mess, but I really love the idea of pitch tracking the guitar. And so what Edwin and I did was that there's a bunch of pitch trackers already native to Max. F-Zero, I think Sigmund's still kicking around somewhere. But there's one that exists in the pure data space, which is the open source space, written by a really amazing C++ developer called Katja Vetter. She's from the Netherlands. She contributes a ton to that community, and she ported an algorithm called the SNAC algorithm, the special normalized autocorrelation algorithm, which deals with a really interesting problem. So like if you've ever used any of those MIDI guitar stuff, those Roland pedals or whatever, they probably do a better job now, but at least 10 years ago, the tracking was kind of hard, and especially if you wanted to control bends and things like that. So the algorithm that she authored as a pure data plugin, or pure data external, did a really good job tracking monophonic lines and bands and glissandos and things like that. So Edwin and I ported it to Max and built this little pitch tracker, which again is free if you want to download it and try it out. I'd love for somebody to actually improve it, frankly. I mean, it works mostly. But the general idea behind this was that you can record the pitch. And again, this is coming more from a modular angle. So rather than generating a MIDI event that you then feed to a digital software instrument, this is kind of more the relationship between CV and like pitch or pitch CV. I built this with the ambition to map the frequency from my guitar to control an oscillator and an operator, and that's what I've tried to do here. I have this on an audio track. This is a pitch tracker. I built a few presets. You can try them out. Basically, it leverages processing in different ways to accommodate different pitch ranges or registers. Obviously a soprano is going to be a different set of pitches or register in comparison to like a bass guitar or something like that. So, and the reason to do that is so that you're not exhausting your CPU too much, because the more you're trying to accommodate that's one reason. The other reason is latency, which is not a really good conversation about. If you want to minimize your latency, if you wanted to say track a bass guitar, you're going to be playing lower pitches. That takes a larger block of samples to determine a pitch, and so the latency is greater. So that's one reason to kind of reconfigure it and have presets for that. So if you play a guitar, if you produce higher pitches, basically you have fewer latency problems to deal with in the world of like pitch tracking. But anyway, I'm going to shut up and play. So this is my guitar. It has 8 strings because, I like heavy music, heavy drum music and stuff like that. And I've just got the guitar running through Echo. And my favorite preset, which I wanted to share with you all, it's the Dark Fade Analog under Vintage. It has this really nice Echo is really worth talking about because it has that. I gotta give credit to Thomas Fald, because he pointed this out when we were on a trainer event at the University of Michigan. Just the drive at the input stage is pretty nice. It sounds pretty almost warm. That's kind of nice. Yeah. Anyway, fun fact. So what I'm going to do here, you can see the pitch, the tracking. If you look over on the left here, you can see the notes are displayed kind of all over the place. But when I play very clear tones, it tracks pretty well. It's definitely monophonic. If I play 2 tones together, you'll get the aggregate pitch. So that's definitely not A sharp. But anyway, if I want to map that to operator, I can do that. You can see it's already it's actually already mapped, but let me go through the process. So click this map button, and then click on the thing I want to map. So it doesn't make any sense to map it to that. But if I want to map this thing, then you'll see, hey, I'm playing 331 hertz or whatever. And the Helmholtz plug-in or device also has this smoothing option, so you can actually have like pitch glide essentially, which is kind of a fun effect. So let's hear what that sounds like. You can see when I'm not playing, it jumps around a bit. That's where you would use the input sensitivity to the threshold out any kind of bumps in the road. One thing with pitch trackers that's incredibly hard to manage is when I'm playing a tone, it'll probably at the tail end, it may pick up an octave higher or an octave lower. So, but sometimes, as in the spirit of Mason, sometimes the bugs are actually kind of cool and add to the mix. So let's see what this sounds like. So I need to play that. Yeah. So I'm just driving operator with just a single MIDI tone. Everything is relative to A3. We got, oh yeah. Why are we not getting anything? Okay, I see a meter. But I don't see what we got here. Chat.
record arm, I think.
Should that matter? I don't think so. No, it's playing the tone. It's just not making it to. It is making it to the group. It's just not making it out, and that is because. Who knows? Let me just. There's an easy fix, possibly. Let me just paste it back in. Okay, that's weird. Why am I not getting anything? More insights from chat. Could be the monitor? Yeah, it could be. Rookie mistake? No. No, it's metering there. Let me try dragging it outside. Still night. Okay, what if I play something through it? Okay, so the first goal here is to figure out why operator's not working. It's pitched
So
really low.
I'm getting a, yeah, I was going to say a very subby low frequency in my headphones.
Do you know what I did? I know exactly what happened. So, then hopefully we can get something a bit better than that. I mapped it to the multi-parameter here, which allows you to kind of jump around on the octave. Sorry about that. Bugs out in some bottom notes too, but it generally does a pretty good job. The latency is fairly minimal, and again, in the spirit of Mason, like mixing it in with like live instruments is actually pretty cool. I think if you want to explore that too. So let's bring the guitar back into the mix. And so the bends. Let's check out the bends. Tracks pretty well, you know, for a little maxed out live device. Does vibrato pretty well. Sounds great with an EBO. Get that on. Sorry, that's probably a little hot. So yeah, I mean, you can do a little bit of thresholding there, and it can certainly be a little less sensitive for sure. So that's the pitch tracker. It's free. Download it, play around with it, see what you think. It doesn't just to be clear, it doesn't generate like your prototypical MIDI note, like start to end note that you can then drive to say something like a VSTI or wavetable or something like that. It works pretty good with operator because you can map it to the fixed oscillator control. Yeah, so those are the devices I wanted to share with you. I covered, just to kind of recap and everything, you know, a little bit under the hood, what Max looks like. It's obviously a pretty powerful tool. You got some Max for Live devices already inside Live that are really pretty good. Convolution to me is a really interesting topic. I'll share some links probably on the Facebook feed for this after the fact if you're interested in checking them out. Play around with making your own impulse responses using like operator, like try synthesizing your own. I think it's kind of cool to generate, particularly using the Pro version where you can like mix two impulse responses together. And yeah, just if there are any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to kind of elaborate on anything that I've presented or noodle more on the guitar, whichever you want.
Yeah, a little bit of everything, I think. That guitar was awesome. It reminded me of the joke from Spinal Tap about the Gibson with the endless sustain. It could just go on. The note could go on for days.
Yeah, I love that film.
But yeah, I think people were really curious about your journey, right? You touched on it briefly, and you kept mentioning that you don't consider yourself like a true developer, and I think that's something that, you know, musicians, when we go into another field, continue to carry on the
Yeah.
imposter syndrome that happens. But I mean, you're obviously
Uh,
doing amazing things. How did you
yeah,
get
I
there?
wouldn't say it's imposter syndrome though. I mean, like when I say I'm not a developer, it's not because I think I can't do it. I can do it, but I just value musicianship so much more. I
Mhm.
value being a musician. I mean, that's the part of my identity that I actually care about, frankly. The that's the stuff that yielded the tools. I mean, people. I mean, I mean, it's kind of disappointing in a way because like I think when people I meet people now for the first time, they're like, "Oh, you run a software company, and you've made a plugin, which you could buy on Sweetwater now, which is kind of cool. And we're really happy with that.
Congratulations, that's a big
Yeah, it's
accomplishment.
kind of a big deal for us. That's a milestone. But like for me, that all of that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for music. Like so, a little bit about my background, if you're interested. I mean, I went to school for music. That's the only thing I ever studied. Um, you know, it was kind of graduate school where I started to focus on kind of more computer science topics. When I say I'm not a developer, it's really just because I didn't go through computer science at the university level. I mean, that doesn't necessarily matter, but um, you know, I think there's a path there that certainly helps, like going through things like data structures and algorithms through to you uh, software management. So I know all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't really. Fortunately, I have a business partner that fills in all of my many gaps in my
Mhm.
knowledge. You know, because he is actually he went to school for that kind of thing. So I get to do the fun stuff. I mean, I get to design the thing, and I'm pretty comfortable writing C, which is kind of weird maybe to hear, but I think that because that comes from using PD, and when I was kind of heavily in the pure data community and the Max community as well, I bought a book by Eric Lyon, who is a good friend, and he's based at Virginia Tech, and he wrote this book, designing audio externals for Max and Max MSP and PD, and I just love that book. I mean, I just got really it broke down the barrier of I don't want to learn textual programming at all, and then it just kind of it started with um, the angle, which was like I want to make this synthesizer or delay or something to that effect. You know, he has a chapter on um, stochastic synthesis, the thing that the type, Yanis Anakis, kind of crazy, more experimental stuff as well. It's just really, it's a real good nerd out, and it really whet my appetite to learn more. Um, C++ on the other hand, which is the industry standard, is just such a behemoth, and like Ed and I have been developing plugins together for 2 years, and I've learned a whole lot, but I have so much left to learn. So yeah, I mean, it kind of for me, what I've learned is the importance of a team. You know, when you're making a business, we have a certified training school, like an online music production school that we have under the brand of Delta Sound Labs as well. That we run out of Cleveland, but we now we take students from anywhere. Um, and there's a team of trainers and educators from Cleveland that are a part of that too. So it's kind of like being in a band again. You know, you come up with this kind of wild idea for an angle. But anyway, so it's kind of a little bit about my trajectory. I still write music. I finished a record last year with a German drone artist called Helmut Neidhard. His alias is N, the letter N. If you like drony, heavy guitar, doomy sounding stuff, this might be your cup of tea. It's out on a record label in Germany called Deno Valley, if you're interested in checking it out. But I'm working on a new setup. Actually, the demo track I pulled, it was just a short sample from a production I'm working on at the minute too. So.
Do you release under your name? How can people find your songs?
No, I stopped doing that pretty early on. My alias is Signals Under Test, which I've been using since 20, 2010, 2009, 2010. I released an EP, full-length album that was very ambient and kind of guitar-based. The thing I did with Helmet was much noisier and closer to my metal roots, which is always fun.
Mm.
The stuff I'm writing now, I don't even know what it is. It's a mix. It's a potpourri of like heavy metal meets. I mean, a lot of it's always centered around the guitar, but I'm finding more and more. I'm getting more comfortable with the idea of just using audio sound, like sampling my own stuff that isn't necessarily a stringed instrument. I love. I have this Appalachian dulcimer. In fact, I've done two uh, remote concerts since the pandemic started. The first one was with guitar, which was fun. I did that for a experimental music group in Memphis, Tennessee, which was really, really cool. I was really right at the beginning. And then I did one over Twitch, and that was kind of inspired by a new music group in Cleveland called FP Creative. And I thought, it's a really good opportunity to just get a piezo mic on a dulcimer, an instrument I don't really know that well, and learn something new. And I hooked it through my usual pedal rig of, electro harmonics, delays and distortions, and a wah pedal at the end. And I had that coming in through live. And for drums, in that case, like I love working with live drummers. But if I don't have access to a drummer or percussionist, I'll use the DFAM by Moog.
Mm. That sounds like a
'Cause
really interesting setup. Dulcimer and a DFAM.
yeah, well, it's recorded and it's online if you want to check it out. But I have a Facebook page for the Signals Under Test stuff. It's just facebook.com/signals under tests.
I went ahead and shared the website Signal Under Test on the chat for people.
Thanks. Yeah, if you got any other questions, I'd love to hear them. Or
Yeah, no, I think those are all the questions that we have, and
sure. Okay.
I can tell you're really passionate about everything that you do, music and education and development, and it's really inspiring, not only for me, but I know for our audience to hear that story and see what that's all about, because they're both journeys that take so long to never master, right? You will never we will never master music, we'll never master technology, and it's a great feeling that when you dive into something that's always going to constantly challenge you in a positive way. And I think a lot of people feed off of that when they get into music.
Yeah, I mean, Mason, I can't give you enough credit. I mean, just watching you and how intricate your craft is. I mean, I actually worked with a percussionist who is getting really interested in sensory percussion and using it to control video, but just seeing how like the effort you put into like manipulating MIDI was just, it's wild. I mean, it gets me really excited to just sit down with my guitar and just lock down and just get back to playing more. So thank you for that.
No, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, my hope out of this is some kind of collaboration on a really interesting music making device.
Yeah.
From you too.
Send on your sides. Yeah, whatever you. If I can help, I certainly will, for sure.
Yeah, I was trying not to be too forward.
I'll do it for you. Yeah, I'm a big fan of community building, and when such talent comes together, and it's a perfect fit.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a real pleasure to be here and to hang out. Yeah, I mean, I did joke initially, like when we were doing the changeover, I wanted to build a sample and hold really quick, but I think I'd get in trouble if I did that now, so I'll leave it there.
Well, we'll have you back for a deep dive.
Yeah, I mean, if any of your user group are interested in learning Max, I'd love to sit down and build some stuff.
That's awesome. Well, thanks both of you for your time.
You're welcome.
You're very generous in sharing. I just want to remind everybody to keep tuning into these. Follow Ricky's work, follow Mason's work in the links on the comments section. And don't forget to join us next week. We're going to have LP Giobbi and Antonio Sage presenting. That's going to be a lot of fun. So see everybody.